I've JD'd over 300 weddings in my career. I've seen nervous grooms faint at the altar, flower girls have meltdowns, and drunk uncles try to recreate Michael Jackson's Thriller with catastrophic results. After a decade in the business, I thought I'd seen it all until the Harper Sullivan wedding last June. My name is Marcus Reed. I run Amplified Moments, a boutique DJ service that specializes in crafting personalized musical experiences for weddings and special events. I'm not just a guy who presses play. I'm part musical curator, part crowd psychologist, and sometimes, though I never expected this role, part crisis manager when things go sideways. The Harper Sullivan wedding should have been straightforward. Jessica Harper, 28, elementary school teacher, was marrying Cameron Sullivan, 30, firefighter. They'd chosen a rustic vineyard venue with string lights and wildflower centerpieces. Pinterest perfect, but nothing extravagant. Their musical selections leaned toward indie folk for the ceremony and dinner, transitioning to upbeat classics for dancing. Standard stuff. During our planning meetings, Jessica struck me as organized but relaxed, with that quiet happiness I've come to recognize in brides who care more about the marriage than the wedding. Cameron was the more exuberant of the two, excitedly discussing song choices for their first dance and the mother-son dance. "What about the father-daughter dance?" I'd asked during our final meeting 2 weeks before the wedding. It was a routine question on my checklist. A shadow had crossed Jessica's face. "We're still figuring that out," she'd said, exchanging a look with Cameron. "My dad and I, it's complicated, but we're working on it." I'd nodded and moved on. Family complications weren't unusual, and most couples preferred to handle sensitive issues privately. I made a mental note to have alternate songs ready, but didn't press for details. On the wedding day, I arrived at the vineyard 4 hours early, as was my standard practice. The ceremony was scheduled for 5 p.m., with cocktail hour at 6, dinner at 7, and dancing until midnight. I set up my equipment methodically: speakers, mixing board, lighting rig, and backup systems for everything, because technical failures aren't an option in this business. The wedding coordinator, Vanessa, stopped by during my sound check. We'd worked together on several events and had a good rapport. "Everything good to go, Marcus?" she asked, checking items off her clipboard. "All set," I confirmed. "How's everything else coming along?" Something in her expression made me pause. "Mostly fine," she said carefully. "But there might be a situation developing with the bride's father. Just be prepared for possible changes to the ceremony music lineup." Before I could ask for clarification, she was called away to handle a crisis with the flower arrangements. I returned to my preparations, unaware that in just a few hours, I would witness one of the most tension-filled wedding moments of my career and play an unexpected role in how it unfolded. What I didn't know then was that Jessica's complicated relationship with her father was about to explode into a situation that would test not just my professional abilities, but my understanding of what family, love, and celebration truly mean. The vineyard hummed with pre-wedding activity as guests began to arrive. From my DJ station on a small platform near the reception tent, I had a perfect view of both the ceremony site, a picturesque arch framed by grapevines, and the gathering wedding party. The bridesmaids, in dusty blue dresses, clustered nervously near the bridal suite, a converted wine cellar with French doors opening onto a private garden. The groomsmen, looking slightly uncomfortable in their gray suits and tan boots, stood in a loose semicircle around Cameron, who was checking his phone with increasing frequency. Vanessa, the wedding coordinator, moved through the space with practiced efficiency, her headset occasionally crackling with updates from her assistant. But even from a distance, I could sense her tension as she repeatedly glanced toward the parking area where a black Lincoln Town Car had just arrived. A tall man in his 60s emerged, distinguished, looking with silver hair and a bearing that suggested authority. He straightened his tie, declined help with his cufflinks from a hovering assistant, and surveyed the venue with what appeared to be critical assessment rather than paternal pride. "That's Robert Harper," Vanessa murmured, appearing suddenly beside my booth. "Jessica's father, Executive VP at Cumberland Financial. His contribution paid for about 70% of this wedding. And that's significant because... I prompted, sensing there was more to the story. "Because he's been using it as leverage," she said quietly. He initially refused to participate unless Jessica uninvited her stepmother, his ex-wife's former best friend. Then he insisted the rehearsal dinner be moved to his preferred restaurant despite the couple's reservations elsewhere. Now he's apparently making noise about the ceremony itself. This explained the tension I'd sensed during our planning meetings. Jessica's complicated relationship with her father was starting to come into focus. The bride's mother arrived earlier, Vanessa continued. Diane remarried about 5 years ago to a landscape architect named Paul. They seem lovely. Jessica is very close with them. I nodded, mentally cataloging these dynamics. As a DJ, understanding family relationships was crucial, especially when selecting music for key moments and making announcements that acknowledged the appropriate people. Any other landmines I should know about? I asked. Vanessa hesitated. Cameron's family is pretty straightforward. Middle class, tight-knit, supportive. They've been trying to play peacemaker between Jessica and her father, but double quotes, she shrugged. Some people see weddings as celebrations. Others see them as opportunities to exercise control. As if summoned by our conversation, a commotion erupted from the direction of the bridal suite. The maid of honor, Jessica's sister Megan, I recalled from my notes, emerged looking distressed. She spoke rapidly to Vanessa's assistant, who immediately directed her toward our location. "There's a problem," Megan said breathlessly, her carefully applied makeup already threatening to smudge from held-back tears. "Dad's refusing to walk Jess down the aisle," he says. "Either she acknowledges Mom's abandonment in the program, or he's not participating." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, the universal sign of event coordinators reaching deep for patience. The ceremony starts in 40 minutes. The programs were printed weeks ago. Jess is trying not to fall apart, Megan continued. She knew he might pull something, but she didn't think he'd wait until literally the last moment. While they discussed immediate options, I observed Robert Harper speaking intently with an older couple I assumed were Cameron's parents. His posture was stiff, his gestures controlled but emphatic. The Sullivan parents looked increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't just standard family tension. This was strategic emotional manipulation unfolding in real time, threatening to derail what should have been a joyful occasion. As a DJ, I'm accustomed to reading a room, sensing the emotional current and adjusting the musical atmosphere accordingly. But the atmosphere developing here would require more than a skillful transition between songs. The Harper-Sullivan wedding was balanced on a knife's edge of potential disaster, and somehow, I suspected my role was about to expand far beyond playing the processional music. What I didn't yet understand was how central music would become in the next hour, not just as background or entertainment, but as a powerful force that would help a determined bride reclaim her wedding day from the chaos of family dysfunction. I watched the situation unfold while continuing my preparations, adjusting levels and double-checking my ceremony playlist. Vanessa had hurried off with Megan toward the bridal suite, while Robert Harper now stood alone, checking his watch with theatrical impatience. Cameron's best man approached him cautiously. Their brief conversation ended with Robert shaking his head firmly and walking toward the parking area, presumably to his car. The best man looked defeated as he jogged back to Cameron, who was now standing with his parents, their expressions a mixture of concern and anger. My headset crackled. "Marcus, this is Vanessa. Can you come to the bridal suite? Bring your tablet. We need to discuss music changes." I grabbed my equipment and made my way through the increasingly restless guests. The wedding was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and people were already seated at the ceremony site, programs in hand, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. The bridal suite was a flurry of activity when I entered. Jessica sat in a chair in her wedding dress, a simple, elegant gown with delicate lace details, while her sister knelt beside her, holding her hand. The makeup artist was making emergency touch-ups to conceal evidence of tears. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Jessica said, her voice remarkably steady despite her reddened eyes. "I need to make some changes to the ceremony." "Whatever you need," I replied, unlocking my tablet and pulling up the event timeline. "My father has decided he won't walk me down the aisle unless I make a public statement about my mother that I refuse to make," she explained. "So I'll be walking alone." "Not alone," Megan interjected firmly. "I'll walk with you." Jessica shook her head. "You're my maid of honor. You need to be up there already." "What about Paul?" suggested one of the bridesmaids, referring to Jessica's stepfather. "Dad would see that as the ultimate insult," Jessica replied. "He'd probably make a scene during the ceremony itself. And this day isn't about their drama." Vanessa checked her watch. "We need to decide quickly. Guests are seated, the officiant is ready, and the groomsmen should start taking their positions in about 10 minutes. Jessica closed her eyes briefly, then looked directly at me. The song we chose for the processional was my father's suggestion, Pachelbel's Canon. I don't want that anymore. It just reminds me of him and his control issues. I nodded, already scrolling through alternatives. What feeling are you going for? Something that says I'm not a victim, she said, a new resolve strengthening her voice. Something that shows this is my choice and my day. Not some traditional handover from father to husband. One of the bridesmaids tentatively suggested, "What about Here Comes the Sun?" It's hopeful, and it's about things getting better. Jessica considered this, then shook her head. Too gentle. I need something with more ... double quotes. She searched for the word ... due termination. A thought occurred to me. What about Brave by Sarah Bareilles? It's about speaking your truth and not letting others silence you. The tempo works for a processional if we use the instrumental version, and the message seems fitting. The transformation on Jessica's face was immediate. A spark of recognition followed by the first genuine smile I'd seen from her that day. That's perfect. Can you make that happen in the next 20 minutes? Absolutely, I confirmed, already creating the edit in my mind. I have the instrumental track in my library. I can adjust it to fit the exact length of your walk. As I worked on my tablet, Jessica stood and smoothed her dress with newfound determination. And for the recessional, instead of the traditional Mendelssohn wedding march, can we use Signed, Sealed, Delivered? Let's bring some joy back into this day. Done, I said, admiring her resilience. Anything else? She exchanged looks with her sister and bridesmaids. Yes, cancel the father-daughter dance slot entirely. We'll extend the couple's first dance and then go straight to the open dancing. Vanessa made notes on her clipboard while I updated the music timeline. Just as we finalized the changes, Cameron knocked softly at the door. Against tradition, Jessica waved for him to come in, not caring about the superstition of seeing the bride before the ceremony. He entered and immediately went to her, taking her hands. "Are you okay? Dad told me what happened. He and Mom are furious with your father." "I'm better now," Jessica said. "We've made some changes. I'm walking alone." Cameron's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to. It's my choice," she insisted. "Actually, I think I prefer it this way. No one giving me away because I'm not property." He smiled at that, but his eyes remained troubled. "He's still out there, you know, talking to guests, acting like everything's normal. Some of them are wondering why he's not getting ready to walk you down the aisle." Jessica's expression hardened, momentarily, then softened as she looked at her fiancé. "Let him. This day isn't about him anymore. It's about us." As they shared a brief moment together, I finalized the new musical selections and prepared to return to my station. The ceremony would begin in 15 minutes, still on schedule, despite the emotional upheaval. What none of us realized yet was that Robert Harper had no intention of quietly accepting his daughter's decision to proceed without him. The real conflict was just beginning, and how it would resolve would depend largely on choices made in the next crucial hour. As I hurried back to my DJ station, I noticed several significant developments unfolding across the venue. Near the bar setup, Jessica's mother, Diane, was engaged in what appeared to be an intense but controlled conversation with Robert. Her husband, Paul, stood slightly behind her, his hands supportively at the small of her back. Their body language spoke volumes, Diane leaning forward with emphatic gestures, Robert defensive with arms crossed. Meanwhile, Cameron's father had gathered the groomsmen in a tight circle, speaking with the serious expression of a coach before a championship game. The best man nodded repeatedly, occasionally glancing toward the parking area where several of Robert's business associates, instantly recognizable by their expensive suits and slightly bored expressions, were checking their phones and looking impatiently at their watches. Vanessa intercepted me before I reached my equipment. "New complication," she said in a low voice. "Robert's current wife, Veronica, just called. Apparently, he texted her that there was an issue, and now she's driving over, despite not being invited. How long until she arrives?" 20 minutes, maybe less. She was at their country club, which isn't far. This added a volatile new element to an already complex situation. I remembered Jessica mentioning that her father had remarried just a year after divorcing her mother, creating significant family tension. "There's more," Vanessa continued. "Jessica's younger brother Tyler just arrived. He wasn't expected until later because he had a college exam this morning. He doesn't know about the aisle situation yet, but he and his father have been estranged for months over Robert's refusal to continue paying his tuition after he switched majors from business to education. The family dynamics were becoming increasingly layered. What had initially seemed like a simple case of a controlling father making a last-minute power play was revealing itself as part of a much larger pattern of manipulative behavior affecting multiple family members. As I reached my station and began finalizing the new musical selections, I noticed Megan emerging from the bridal suite, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression shifted from frustration to surprise to something like cautious hope. After ending the call, she immediately sought out Vanessa, their heads bent together in rapid conversation. I caught fragments as they passed near my station. ... says he wants to fix this ... double quotes and ... Jessica needs to decide quickly. Whatever was developing seemed significant, but I had no time to investigate further. The ceremony was now just minutes away, and I needed to communicate the musical changes to the string quartet that would be performing the live instrumental versions of the selected songs. The quartet's first violinist, Elena, quickly grasped the new plan. "We know Brave," she assured me. "We can follow your instrumental track and blend with it seamlessly. The recessional change is no problem either." As guests took their final seats and the officiant moved into position under the vine-covered arch, I noticed another subtle but important detail. Jessica's brother Tyler had disappeared into the bridal suite. While Robert Harper was now engaged in what appeared to be a tense phone conversation, his back turned to the ceremony site. The stage was set for a wedding ceremony unlike any I had previously witnessed, one where music would need to do far more than simply provide a pleasant backdrop. The songs we'd chosen would now carry the emotional weight of Jessica's Declaration of Independence, underscoring her determination to reclaim her celebration from the shadow of family dysfunction. What I didn't yet realize was that music would also provide the unexpected solution to a situation that was continuing to evolve in unpredictable ways. 5 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, my headset crackled again. "Marcus, delay the processional music by 3 minutes, Vanessa instructed. "We have a developing situation." Through my vantage point, I could see a cluster of activity near the bridal suite. Tyler had emerged and was now speaking intensely with Robert, while Megan hovered nearby. Jessica remained out of sight, but Cameron had positioned himself protectively near the suite's entrance, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. I adjusted my timeline and signaled to the string quartet. Elena nodded, communicating the delay to her musicians with practiced hand gestures. The guests shifted in their seats, a low murmur of conversation rising as the scheduled start time came and went. Then, remarkably, Robert and Tyler disappeared into the bridal suite together. Cameron hesitated, then followed them inside. The tension in the air was palpable as 5 minutes stretched into 10. I kept my fingers near my controls, ready to begin the music at Vanessa's signal, while subtly transitioning the soft prelude music I'd been playing to keep the guests comfortable during the delay. Finally, the bridal suite door opened. First emerged Tyler, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Then came Robert, his earlier rigidity replaced by what appeared to be genuine humility, something I suspected didn't come naturally to him. Most surprisingly, they were followed by Jessica, now holding onto both their arms. Vanessa rushed to my station. "Change of plans. Jessica will be walking with both her brother and her father. Can you extend the processional to accommodate 3 people instead of 1? "On it," I confirmed, quickly adjusting the instrumental track of Brave to add an additional 30 seconds. I signaled Elena, who gave me a thumbs up indicating the quartet was ready for the change. The traditional procession began. First, the grandparents were escorted to their seats to a gentle Debussy piece. Then Cameron and his groomsmen took their positions by the arch as the quartet played a subtle arrangement of Can't Help Falling in Love. The bridesmaids followed, with Megan last as maid of honor. When everyone was in position, I faded out the current music and prepared for the bride's entrance. A moment of complete silence fell across the vineyard, that magical pause of collective anticipation that precedes every bridal processional. I pressed play, and the first notes of Brave began to flow from the speakers, immediately picked up and enriched by the live quartet. The guests rose to their feet and turned toward the entrance, many looking slightly confused at the non-traditional music choice. Jessica appeared, radiant in her gown, with Tyler on her right and Robert on her left. But this was clearly not the traditional father giving away his daughter. Their body language told a different story. Jessica stood tall between them, her arms linked with theirs, but her posture conveying that she was the one leading this procession, not being led. As the lyrics of the song played in everyone's minds, though only the instrumental version filled the air, the message became clear. Asterisk, say what you want to say, and let the words fall out. Honestly, I want to see you be brave. Asterisk, halfway down the aisle, something unexpected happened. Jessica paused, turned to her father, and embraced him briefly. He seemed momentarily overcome, returning the hug with visible emotion before they continued their walk. When they reached the altar, Robert stepped back after kissing his daughter's cheek, allowing Tyler to be the one who placed Jessica's hand in Cameron's. As the music concluded and the officiant welcomed the guests, I caught Vanessa's eye across the space. Her slight headshake communicated that she'd explain later, but the crisis appeared to have been resolved in a way no one had anticipated. The ceremony proceeded beautifully from that point. Jessica and Cameron exchanged personalized vows that spoke of resilience and partnership through challenges. When the officiant pronounced them married, I transitioned the quartet's music into the recorded track of Signed, Sealed, Delivered. Its joyful opening notes provoking delighted laughter from the guests as the newlyweds practically danced back up the aisle. During the cocktail hour that followed, as I played upbeat acoustic covers that wouldn't compete with conversation, Vanessa finally had a moment to fill me in on what had transpired in the bridal suite. Tyler was the game changer, she explained, sipping a much-needed glass of water. He told his father that this pattern of control had to stop, that he was destroying his relationship with both his children. Said Jessica wanted him there but wouldn't accept his conditions, and he needed to decide what was more important, being right or being her father. And Robert actually listened? I asked, surprised given everything I'd observed earlier. Sometimes people can surprise you, Vanessa replied. Jessica said she'd walk with both of them, acknowledging her brother's support throughout the family difficulties while also allowing her father to participate. But she made it clear it was her choice to include him, not his right to give her away. What had begun as a power struggle had transformed into something more meaningful. A young woman defining the terms of her relationships, and a father, however imperfectly, beginning to recognize the consequences of his controlling behavior. As I prepared the music for the reception, I realized I was witnessing something rare and powerful. A moment when music hadn't just accompanied a life transition, but had helped facilitate emotional healing. Jessica's choice of brave had made a statement that words alone couldn't express, creating space for a resolution that honored her autonomy while leaving room for reconciliation. The most significant turning point in this wedding hadn't been a grand gesture or dramatic confrontation. It had been the subtle shift from music as tradition to music as personal truth. And somehow that had made all the difference. The cocktail hour transitioned smoothly into dinner as guests found their assigned tables in the reception tent. From my elevated DJ position, I observed the continuing ripple effects of the ceremony's unexpected developments. Robert Harper sat at the family table, noticeably subdued compared to his earlier commanding presence. He engaged politely with Jessica's mother, Diane, and her husband, Paula, significant shift from the tension I'd witnessed before the ceremony. Tyler remained close to his sister, their bond evident in their easy interaction and shared laughter. Just as the salad course was being served, Vanessa appeared at my booth with an update. Veronica arrived during the ceremony and watched from the back, she whispered. She and Robert had words afterward. Apparently she's not pleased about him caving to Jessica's wishes. I glanced toward the bar area where a stylish woman in her early 40s, presumably, Veronica, stood nursing a glass of white wine, her expression suggesting she found the rustic vineyard setting beneath her standards. Will that create problems for the reception? I asked. Shouldn't. Robert actually told her to either support the celebration or leave. Vanessa's tone conveyed her surprise at this development. She's staying, but don't expect her on the dance floor. As dinner progressed, I maintained a carefully curated playlist of acoustic covers and light jazz, keeping the volume at the perfect level for conversation while still providing atmosphere. I used these quieter moments to observe the guests' dynamics, preparing mentally for how I would need to read the room during the dancing portion of the evening. The real test came during the toasts. As best man, Cameron's brother delivered a heartfelt speech about commitment and partnership. Then Megan rose as maid of honor, her glass trembling slightly as she began speaking about resilience and the meaning of family. "My sister has always known who she is," she said, her voice strengthening as she continued. "Even when it would have been easier to bend to keep the peace, Jess stays true to herself while still leaving room for people to grow and change." Her gaze moved meaningfully toward their father. Today was a perfect example of how strength and compassion can exist together. The tent fell silent as all eyes turned to Robert, whose expression registered a complex mixture of discomfort and recognition. After a moment, he raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement of his daughter's words, a small gesture, but one that seemed to release a collective tension in the room. When dinner concluded, the moment arrived for the couple's first dance. Jessica and Cameron had chosen At Last by Etta James's, a classic choice that took on new significance given the day's events. As they moved across the dance floor, their joy was palpable, undiminished by the earlier conflict. Then came the scheduled time for what would have been the father-daughter dance. I prepared to transition directly to open dancing as Jessica had requested during our crisis planning session. But as the first dance concluded, Robert approached the edge of the dance floor. His body language hesitant, so different from the imposing figure who had arrived in the Lincoln town car hours earlier. Jessica noticed him standing there and, after a brief exchange with Cameron, made her way toward her father. They spoke briefly, their conversation inaudible over the ambient music I was playing. Then Jessica turned and caught my eye, giving a subtle nod that I instantly understood. I reached for my microphone, making a real-time decision about how to handle this unplanned moment while respecting Jessica's earlier wishes to cancel the traditional father-daughter dance. Whatever was happening needed to be framed as the bride's choice, not a reversion to patriarchal tradition. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, in a slight change to our program, "Jessica has invited her father to join her for a special dance." As they moved to the center of the floor, I selected a song that hadn't been on our original playlist but seemed perfect for this complex moment of tentative reconciliation. "The Way You Look Tonight," a classic that acknowledged the day's beauty without the more problematic aspects of traditional father-daughter dance songs about giving away daughters. As they began to dance, I noticed Robert saying something to Jessica, his expression more vulnerable than it had been all day. Whatever his words, they brought a genuine smile to her face, not the polite one she had maintained during the earlier tension, but something real and healing. This unexpected moment of connection set the tone for the rest of the evening, creating space for genuine celebration to finally take center stage. Once the dance floor opened to all guests, the reception transformed into the joyful celebration it was meant to be. I transitioned the music from classic standards to contemporary hits, reading the crowd's energy and adjusting my selections accordingly. Years of experience had taught me how to build a dance floor, gradually starting with universal favorites that would draw in the reluctant dancers before moving to more energetic tracks as the night progressed. What fascinated me was watching how the earlier tension continued to resolve through the universal language of music and celebration. Tyler convinced his college friends to join him in an enthusiastic, if uncoordinated, dance circle that eventually pulled in some of Jessica's teacher colleagues. Cameron's firefighter buddies, initially clustered near the bar, were now attempting to teach his grandmother a simplified version of the Cupid Shuffle. Most remarkable was the gradual thawing between the previously divided family factions. Diane and Paul had claimed a corner of the dance floor where they were surprisingly adept at swing dancing. After watching them for several songs, Robert, encouraged by Jessica, approached his ex-wife and her husband during a slower number. Their conversation appeared briefly awkward, but concluded with Paul good-naturedly making room for Robert to dance with Diane for half a song, before they switched partners again. "That's something I never thought I'd see," Vanessa commented, appearing beside my booth during a brief lull when I'd stepped back from active mixing to let a requested playlist run. 3 years of coordinating their separate holiday schedules for Jessica's sake, and now they're dancing together. "Music has a way of breaking down barriers," I replied, making a minor adjustment to the upcoming song cue. "It's why I love this job. When it works, it really works." "Speaking of working," she said, checking her clipboard, "we've got the cake cutting in 15 minutes, then open dancing until midnight. Any concerns?" I shook my head. "We're on track. The energy's great, and I've got plenty of requests to work with." I nodded toward the dance floor where Jessica was now leading a group of bridesmaids in a choreographed routine to a Taylor Swift song. "She seems completely different from this morning." "She made the day her own," Vanessa agreed. on her terms. As the evening progressed, I observed a subtle but significant moment between Robert and Tyler during a brief pause while guests were getting fresh drinks. The father and son stood slightly apart from the crowd, engaged in what appeared to be their first real conversation in months. Their body language suggested the exchange was difficult but necessary, with Tyler doing most of the talking and Robert listening with uncharacteristic humility. Later, when I played We Are Family as requested by Megan, I watched Jessica deliberately gather both sides of her family, her mother and stepfather. Her father, Veronica, having departed earlier, her brother and sister into a dance circle. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was powerful. A young woman redefining her family connections on her wedding day, creating space for imperfect reconciliation while maintaining her own boundaries. During my contracted dinner break, Cameron approached my booth with 2 plates of food and a bottle of water. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting the meal beside my equipment. "And I wanted to thank you for earlier. The music changes made all the difference for Jess." "Just doing my job," I replied modestly. "Your wife made the tough calls. I just provided the soundtrack." He shook his head. "It was more than that. When everything was falling apart this morning, you gave her a way to make a statement without creating more drama." Brave was exactly right. After he returned to his guests, I reflected on his words while quickly eating. In most weddings, my role was primarily functional, maintaining the timeline, reading the crowd, ensuring the sound quality was perfect. But today had been different. The music choices had become an essential part of the narrative, helping a bride communicate what words alone couldn't express during a moment of family crisis. As the night drew to a close, I prepared for the final dance, traditionally a romantic slow song for the couple. But Jessica and Cameron had one more surprise in store. They approached my booth together, looking happier and more relaxed than they had all day. "We'd like to change the last song," Jessica said. "Instead of just us, we want everyone out there together." "What did you have in mind?" I asked, already pulling up my library. "Lean on Me," Cameron suggested. "It seems fitting after everything today." I nodded, understanding immediately. Perfect choice. When the time came, I took the microphone one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bride and groom have requested a special final dance and would like everyone to join them on the floor for Lean on Me." As the opening notes played, Jessica and Cameron moved to the center, but quickly began motioning for others to join them. Within moments, the dance floor filled with guests' family members who had been at odds hours earlier now linking arms, friends forming supportive circles, generations connecting through the simple, powerful message of the song. Looking out over this scene of unity that had seemed impossible at the start of the day, I was reminded why music remains such a vital part of our most significant life moments. In the right context, with the right intention, it does more than entertain, it heals, it connects. It transcends barriers of conflict and misunderstanding. The Harper Sullivan wedding had begun with division, but was ending with harmony, both musically and emotionally. As a DJ who had witnessed hundreds of celebrations, I knew this was the rarest and most valuable outcome of all. As the reception approached its final hour, I noticed a subtle but significant change in Robert Harper's demeanor. The controlled, authoritative presence he had projected upon arrival had given way to something more reflective. He spent less time with his business associates, who had clustered near the bar throughout the evening, and more time observing his daughter's happiness from a slight distance. During a brief pause while guests were enjoying the late-night snack station, Robert approached my booth. This was unusual. Typically, fathers of the bride interacted with me only to make announcements or song requests. "You're doing an excellent job," he said, the compliment sounding somewhat formal but sincere. "The music has been more meaningful than I expected, thank you, sir. That's always the goal." He hesitated, then asked, "That song, the one Jessica walked down the aisle to, what was it called again?" "Brave by Sarah Bareilles," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. He nodded slowly. I looked up the lyrics during dinner. Quite pointed. There was no anger in his voice, just a dawning recognition. She was sending me a message, wasn't she? I chose my words carefully, respecting Jessica's privacy while acknowledging what was obvious. Music often expresses what's difficult to say directly, especially on emotional days like weddings. Robert seemed to absorb this, his gaze drifting to where Jessica was laughing with friends near the photo booth. "My daughter has always been strong-willed," he said, a complex mixture of pride and resignation in his tone. Like her grandfather. Like me, I suppose, though we express it differently. Before he could continue, Vanessa appeared with her clipboard. "Marcus, we're approaching the last half hour. Jessica and Cameron would like to know if you received their special request." I nodded, having received a handwritten note from the couple about 20 minutes earlier. "All set. It's programmed for 10 minutes before the end." Robert looked between us, clearly curious but not wanting to pry. Vanessa smoothly changed the subject, asking him about the vintage of wine being served, a topic that momentarily distracted him before he excused himself to rejoin his table. Once he was out of earshot, Vanessa leaned closer. "He's been making rounds for the last hour, brief conversations with Diane and Paul, a longer one with Tyler, even a few minutes with Jessica's grandmother, who hasn't spoken to him civilly since the divorce." "Damage control?" I asked, queuing up the next set of songs. "Maybe initially," she conceded, "but it seems to have evolved into something more genuine. Jessica's aunt told me he actually apologized to her for making today more complicated than it needed to. This was significant. Powerful men like Robert rarely acknowledged missteps, particularly in public settings. Something had shifted for him during this wedding, beyond the simple resolution of the processional crisis. As I prepared for the final sequence of songs, I noticed Jessica and Cameron in deep conversation with Tyler and Megan. Whatever they were discussing involved frequent glances toward Robert, who was now saying goodbyes to his business associates as they prepared to depart. The couple approached my booth a few minutes later, Jessica's expression suggesting she had made an important decision. "We'd like to add something before the final song we requested," she said. "Is there still time?" "Absolutely," I assured her. "What did you have in mind?" Cameron put his arm around his wife's shoulders supportively as she explained what they wanted, a brief but meaningful addition to the evening's closing moments that would require perfect timing and sensitivity on my part. As I made the necessary adjustments to my playlist, I realized I was about to facilitate a moment of potential transformation, not just for Jessica and her father, but for everyone who had witnessed the day's journey from conflict to tentative reconciliation. The energy in the room seemed to shift in anticipation, as if the collective consciousness of the guests somehow sensed that something significant was about to unfold in these final moments of celebration. The dance floor remained full, the joy genuine, but there was an undercurrent of expectation that made this wedding's conclusion unlike any I had previously orchestrated. As the reception entered its final 30 minutes, I transitioned the music to crowd-pleasing classics that had guests of all ages filling the dance floor. The joyful chaos of Sweet Caroline, complete with enthusiastic ba-ba-ba participation, gave way to the cross-generational appeal of September by Earth, Wind and Fire. The celebration had reached that perfect wedding crescendo where inhibitions dissolve and even the most reluctant dancers find themselves moving to the rhythm. Throughout these high-energy moments, I kept a careful eye on the time, aware of the special sequence Jessica had requested for the evening's conclusion. At exactly the agreed moment, I began fading the current song, cueing the lighting technician to subtly warm the room's atmosphere with a softer amber glow. I picked up my microphone, waiting for the perfect moment of quiet anticipation before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach the end of this beautiful celebration, the bride has a special request." The guests quieted, turning toward my booth expectantly. Jessica stood from her seat at the head table and made her way to the center of the dance floor. Jessica would like to share a dance with her father, one they missed earlier today. There was a murmur of surprise and approval from the guests who had witnessed the day's earlier tension. Robert, seated at a table with extended family members, looked genuinely startled. For a moment he seemed frozen in place, perhaps unsure if he had heard correctly. I began playing the song Jessica had selected, Ben E. King's Stand By Me, its opening bass line, instantly recognizable and filled with significance beyond the obvious lyrics. This wasn't a traditional father-daughter dance song with its sentimental lyrics about daddies and little girls. This was something more complex and honest, a song about support through difficult times, about steady presence when challenges arise. Jessica stood alone in the center of the dance floor, poised and waiting. The guests fell completely silent, collectively holding their breath as they watched Robert process what was happening. This wasn't a scripted moment, but a genuine invitation, Jessica offering her father a second chance at connection, but on her terms and her timeline. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, Robert rose from his seat and walked toward his daughter. His usual confident stride was replaced by something more measured, almost humble. When he reached Jessica, he hesitated briefly before extending his hand. They began to dance, their movements initially stiff and formal. But as the first chorus approached, something shifted. Jessica said something that only her father could hear, and his expression transformed. A complex mixture of remorse and gratitude crossing his features before he pulled her into a proper embrace. By the second verse, they were dancing more naturally, Robert occasionally murmuring what appeared to be earnest words while Jessica listened, with an open expression that suggested neither full forgiveness nor lingering resentment, but something more nuanced, a willingness to begin rebuilding on more authentic terms. As the song approached its final chorus, Jessica glanced toward her brother Tyler and motioned for him to join them. He hesitated only briefly before stepping onto the dance floor. Then Megan followed, and within moments, the dance had transformed into a family circle that expanded to include Diane and Paul, Cameron and his parents, and eventually cousins, aunts, and uncles from both sides. What had begun as a reclaimed father-daughter dance had evolved into something more powerful, a visual representation, a family as chosen connection rather than mere obligation or tradition. The guests watched with evident emotion as the Harper Sullivan family, in all its complicated blended reality, moved together to the song's message of steadfast support. As the final notes of Stand By Me faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the venue. Even Vanessa, who had witnessed hundreds of wedding moments, was discreetly dabbing at her mascara with a cocktail napkin. Without pausing, I transitioned directly into the couple's requested final song, Lean on Me. Its thematic connection to the previous track creating a perfect emotional through line. As requested, I picked up the microphone once more. Jessica and Cameron invite everyone to join them on the dance floor for the final dance of the evening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Guests flooded the dance floor, forming interconnected circles around the couple and their families. The earlier divisions between family factions, between social circles, between generations, dissolved completely as everyone sang along to the chorus about leaning on each other for strength and support. After the final song concluded and the last guest departed, I began breaking down my equipment with the satisfied exhaustion that follows a successful event. The venue staff moved efficiently around me, clearing tables and folding chairs as the magical setting returned to its everyday state. Cameron approached as I was packing my speakers, offering to help carry equipment to my van. As we walked through the now quiet vineyard, he shared what had happened in the bridal suite during that crucial moment before the ceremony. Tyler was amazing, he said, carefully navigating the path while carrying one of my speaker stands. He told their dad that he could either be right or be present for his daughter's life, but not both. Said something about how pride had already cost him a relationship with his son, and asked if he was willing to lose his daughter, too. That's pretty profound for a college kid, I remarked. Cameron nodded. Jessica says he's always been the emotional intelligence in the family. Anyway, that's when Robert finally broke. Said he didn't want to lose another child and asked what he could do to fix it, hence the compromise on the aisle walking. Exactly. Jess made it clear she was calling the shots, but she also gave him a path back. That final dance tonight was her idea too, completely spontaneous. She said seeing him try all evening with her mom and stepdad made her want to meet him halfway. As we loaded the last of my equipment, Jessica joined us, still in her wedding dress, though she'd exchanged her heels for comfortable flats. "Thank you for everything," she said, giving me an impulsive hug, "especially for understanding that the music needed to say what I couldn't. That's the power of a good soundtrack," I replied. "It can transform a moment." She smiled, taking her husband's hand. "Our friends kept saying we should just elope to avoid the family drama. I'm glad we didn't. Some things need to be faced directly to be resolved." As I drove away from the vineyard, I reflected on the unique role I'd played in this wedding. Most of the time, my job was simply to create the right atmosphere, to keep the energy flowing, to make sure everyone had a good time. But occasionally, like today, it became something more: collaboration in healing, in transformation, in creating space for authentic human connection. The father who had refused to walk his daughter down the aisle had ultimately taken a much more meaningful journey, one from rigid control to humble reconnection. And somehow, I had helped provide the soundtrack for that journey. using music to bridge divides that words alone couldn't cross. In my decade as a wedding DJ, I had witnessed countless celebrations, but the Harper Sullivan wedding would remain in my memory as a powerful reminder of why music matters in our most significant moments. Not just as entertainment, but as a language that can express what we struggle to say and create pathways to understanding when other approaches fail. 6 months later, I received an unexpected package in the mail, a framed photograph from Jessica and Cameron's wedding. It captured the moment when the family circle had formed during Stand By Me, with Jessica and Robert at the center, their expressions revealing the complex, imperfect, but genuine process of reconciliation. The note attached read simply, "Thank you for the music that made this moment possible. We're still working on it, but this was the beginning of something new. Jessica, Cameron, and yes, even Robert. Thank you for experiencing I was the DJ at the wedding, when the bride's father refused to walk her down the aisle." If this story about music's power to heal family rifts resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you witnessed moments where music bridged seemingly impossible divides? Or perhaps you've experienced how the right song at the right moment can express what words cannot? Share your story, because sometimes the most meaningful connections begin with a simple melody and the courage to offer a dance.